Okay, so I'm Emily. I'm the curator here at the Polasek Museum, where we currently have the exhibition Keepers of Heritage Evolving Identities. So we are interviewing Kathie and Yasir about the collective, and they are the co-curators for the group. So Yasir, it's nice to meet you. I've never actually met you or seen you. I've met Kathie a couple of times.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, so go ahead, introduce yourself, and then if you could tell us how you first got involved with the collective, that would be great.
Okay. Well, my name is Yasir Nieves. One of the curators and one of the artists actually for the exhibition. We started a couple years ago. I think it was around 2015, 2016, if I'm not mistaken, as a project to help other artists to find venues and to promote their work. We found a lot of artists that, especially Puerto Rican artists, that have great work and they have never been able to have the right venues or being exposed the right way. So that's how the mentality started with the group. I know with this particular group, which has evolved every year, different shows that we have put together. In this particular one, you have Angel Rivera, for example. I know him since college. And one of the beauties about this particular one is that we were able to bring artists that were our professors and our mentors, like Martin Garcia, like Rivera. So it is a really interesting concept and experience for all of us.
Mm-hmm. So you've kind of been with them since the beginning of all of this. Okay. All right. Cool. So Kathie, go ahead. You can introduce yourself. And same thing. How did you get involved with the collective?
Well, my name is Kathie Elias. I became an associate curator to the collective just by chance. Well, not necessarily chance, but our connections were not, I don't go back to college with them or anything like that. It's just, I think we connected through the art itself. A couple of years ago, and Yasir, I can't remember what year it was that you guys were at the Appleton. I think it was last year or a year before that.
Yeah, a year and a half, more or less.
A year and a half or so back. Yeah, a co-worker then, she gave me an invitation to the opening reception that they had over there. And I remember reading it and I was shocked. I was like, whoa, these are big names, because I was looking at Domingo Garcia, I was looking at Pablo Rubio in the invitation. I was just taken aback that these were big names, not because I wasn't expecting them to sing that museum, but because I have never, since I moved to Florida about 6 years ago, I had never seen a show that was so comprehensive and that they had the artists of that caliber. I was just looking at the invitation in disbelief. And I remember going back to my computer and kind of reading a little bit more about the collective and finding out who they were, right? So I picked up Angel's name and I sent him an email right away. I said, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm a museum educator that has been in the museum world for 15 years. And I have been here in Florida for 6 years. And this is the very first time I have seen a list of artists such as you guys coming together for an exhibition. So I'm thrilled. I want to meet you guys. I'm going to the reception. So I don't remember if it was a Friday or if it was a weekday. I don't know. I know that I took a couple of days off from work. So I drove to Ocala and I actually stayed there overnight because I didn't want to drive back that day. And so I listened to the panel. I think I asked a question or two, I can't remember. And then I went and introduced myself to Yasir. And then through him, I met Angel. Yeah. So we just kept in touch after that.
Yeah. No, I love that the group itself has not just the artists, but that you do have museum professionals and curators, that you two work together on all of this. Because Unfortunately, this exhibition has been pretty much my first real exposure to Puerto Rican art and art history. Unfortunately, it's not something that we were taught in art school in undergrad, and it should be. So it's really exciting. And I had no idea, being new to Florida myself, how big of a concentration of Puerto Rican artists there are in Central Florida. So like you had said, it's a great opportunity for the artists to get the exposure and to be exhibited. So another question I have is, before I got the list of pieces, you guys had already gone through and whittled it down. So how did you decide, or how do you decide who is part of the collective and who's in the show?
For me, the main thing with this particular one, it was, and it's the challenge too, is to be able to establish a connection between all the artists and all the pieces. It was not more about a representation of each artist, it's how that piece connects with the other artist. And as a group, I was able to gather several pieces from each artist, and that's how I drew my storyline from it. And basically what we want to represent as a group in that particular show. Like I said, it was not about an individual representation of this is the best piece from this artist or from this era. It's about that inner connection between other ones, because we need to understand something. The biggest challenge and the most beautiful thing about this show is that it's three different generations of artists with somehow similar experience in different eras, and how you can tell that story, that inner connection between those paintings and what each one of them have to say regarding their personal journey, and how all becomes together in one. I think that was the main challenge, but it's what it makes it really unique, I think. And I think we were able to accomplish it. If that answers your question.
Yeah, Kathy.
I think for me, the process, I think working with Yasir was really beneficial to me because he's already worked with the collection before. So he knows certain pieces a lot better than I would know them. But for me, I'm a museum educator, and I have been an educator for the past 15 years. Like, I've been at 3 different institutions, but I've always done the same job technically. So for me as a museum educator, I always have visitors at the forefront of exhibitions. That's what I do. That's my job. I rarely ever get to curate and put together a show. I've done that in the past, of course, but it's not mainly what I do. My job, it's heavy on interpretation. And so when I look at a group of works of art, I am thinking, what is the patron going to see in terms of a narrative from an educational perspective? So for me, the name Keepers of Heritage was kind of my guideline. And I used that to ask myself questions such as, what are they keeping? What's that heritage that they're keeping? What are they preserving? So I was looking at the artwork more in terms of techniques and styles, and how those styles were speaking to each other. How you see the generational gaps in between these artists, but how one influenced the other. And when people come into the museum and they see the sample, can they see the connections between these 2 or 3 generations and how they work with the actual materials? And that's because my connection with living artists has always been centered in the studio experience. So I'm thinking about them in their creative process, and can people see the connections between the 2 or the 3 generations, I should say. And also the themes and what was portrayed in the artworks was also really important to me in selecting the pieces, because I wanted people, when I moved to Florida, I think the main conflict for me, it was feeling at home, and I couldn't find that, and I still struggle with that at times. I don't feel at home. I am missing a lot of my Puerto Rican identity, who I am as a person, kind of breaks in a way when I live here, now that I'm leaving here, right? My children were born here, both of them. So for me, there's a constant struggle in like giving them and passing that on to them, that they're Puerto Ricans, that we have an identity as a nation, that we have a history. And so I'm looking at the pieces thinking, would this show people what Puerto Rico really is about? And can you really see who we are as a people, and that we have our own story? And I remember when you guys had the show at the Appleton Up Person, I remember a member of the audience asked the question, is this about independence? So he thought there was a political theme behind it. Yeah, yes, there's political, arts are political in a way. But to me, it was just the answer that I wanted to blurt out from the audience, and I did it because I was not a part of the panel, but I wanted to say, well, I think it's a political statement in of itself that we are American citizens, but there's a whole sample of artworks that are distinctively Puerto Rican. And so I didn't want the pieces to lose that, or the exhibition, I should say. I didn't want the exhibition not to have that distinctively Puerto Rican art, not necessarily because of the way the artwork was created, but because of the imagery involved and how these generations communicate with each other in the way they create art.
Okay. Yeah, and it is really interesting. Like I said, this is really my first exposure to it. And it definitely is, I mean, it, like you said, it's American art, but it has it's really its own genre.
That's a really interesting statement. It's one of the things that we're trying to do with this group, and we were trying to promote all these years, is that statement, that label of, oh, you're a Puerto Rican, or you're from this area. These are the expectation of a painting, or what you should be painting, or and I think that's very wrong. I think you can see in this show the variety and the caliber of the artistry and the pieces and each individual artist. And that's something that we truly want to protect. We truly want to put that out there, it's funny, Cathy, because I do remember that question during the panel, and how it went from one side to another one. And yes, it's political, and everything's political, and everything is religious. And some artists try to be an advocate for certain stands and promote those, but I don't think that should enclose them in an era or a place or like I said, a caliber of what they're actually able to do, and that's something that we truly try to push out there. That regionality of, or misconception of, you're from here, these are the expectations, or you're from this era, these are from the expectations. And you can see the inner connection of this particular show, from people that knew each other or influenced each other, and other ones that didn't. They didn't know each other, neither their work or their art or personal, until they met as a group. And I think that's a beautiful thing. For us, it's a win situation, It's being able to put all these heads together and create that inner connection. And we use each other as a powerhouse, and put that name out there.
Yeah, and like you had said, you have some of the names in the exhibition are big names. And I hate, like you said, I hate to say Puerto Rican art, because it's just art. It shouldn't be categorized as it's by a Puerto Rican artist. It doesn't matter. These pieces, especially, everything is incredible. There are a couple of the abstract pieces that you could totally mistake for German abstraction or German expressionism, or just now, I don't know if either of you know, I do have a lot of background information on a lot of the artists. Most of them, as I know, were born and raised in Puerto Rico. So both of you are from Puerto Rico. You were both born there, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I thought so, but I always hate to assume that. So what made you two come to the, I mean, you're practically a state. What made you come to the continental states, I should say?
Well, for me, it was just job opportunities. Like I've been a museum professional literally my entire life. I walked into a museum when I was 16 years old, and I never left museums after that. But the climate was changing, and the social climate, I should say, was changing. And I remember 6 years ago, we started noticing there's really very little opportunity for both my husband and myself. We're both college educated, and we just couldn't find anything at that point in time, anything in terms of jobs. And so being newlyweds, or essentially newlyweds, we have been married for a couple of months. We were expecting our first son. And so we were looking at each other thinking, I don't want to give up what I love just to stay here. Which of course, in terms it meant giving up being on the island. And I really do miss Puerto Rico and what it means for me. But at the time, it just seemed like the most reasonable option was to come here. But I think there's a common thread between all Puerto Ricans that leave Puerto Rico. We want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
We just leave the island and we daydream about coming back. And I don't think we've ever spent a day not thinking about how can we make it so that we can go back. So for us at the time, and we were young and we were newlyweds, and we just, we didn't know what to do with a baby that we were expecting. For us, it meant coming here and taking job opportunities that were offered to us while we were back there. But now I guess the question that I ask myself is what makes me stay here? And that's a question that I don't have an answer for right now. At the moment, it's just because this is life, and it's 9 to 5, and you do your job and you take care of the kids and whatnot. But I do constantly ask myself, what can I do so that I can go back one day?
Yeah. Yasir, what brought you to the continental states?
Such a big question.
I know, I'm sorry.
Well, I left the island as soon as I finished my BA, and I moved to Europe, actually.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I did my master's. And I think I've been kind of nomad all my life. So it's been really easy for me to move from one place to another one. So I left the island, I moved to Europe, and then I went to did my master's. My plan was to stay in Europe, but one thing led to another one, and I ended in Florida. And I made Orlando my home for 10 years. And then I've been all over the place, Chicago, and now I'm in Nashville. So I do believe, yes, I miss the island, and I miss a lot of things from it. My family's still there. And hopefully I can come back one day. I don't know when that will be. Definitely, I want to be able to influence some of the art scene and try to fill gaps of the movement down there, and the actual try to bring some opportunities, and some awareness, and I think it's really important. For example, from my own hometown, Arecibo, I produced many great artists, and that a lot of people don't even know, and the people that know, they cannot make that connection, and there's really right now nothing that cultivates other generations from different areas of the island, so eventually I would like to present some kind of project to develop more artists from there, but give them the tools and the opportunities to actually expand and get out of certain areas, you know.
Yeah.
For example, that's it is a perfect example. All this, how all this group starts. You know, we start doing some research and we find out all these great artists hidden within Florida or within United States. Some other ones even in the island, and nobody knew of them, or they haven't been able to have the right venues to expose themselves. You know, and what's your impression?
I love it. It's definitely different from things that I've seen, not just our museum do, but a lot of other museums. It is gorgeous. I mean, and when originally I've only been here a year, and when I got here, I started talking to Kathie and Jose and Angel, and I remember I hadn't really seen pictures yet, and I was expecting, from what they told me, I was thinking, okay, everything's going to be either kind of politically charged, or it's going to be really, really colorful, and I'm not going to know what to do with it. But then I started seeing the choices that you and Kathie had made, and I do remember we had a conversation about, like you said, sometimes some artists will make political statements in their work, and that was something, as a small nonprofit, that I remember saying, we just have to be careful. If there is something that is blatantly politically charged, we might need to cut it from the show. But I mean, I think my biggest love for this exhibition is learning about all the artists.
It is really interesting that what you just said about how the institution, like, we will have to be careful with their statement, you know, and I think without disrespect, but I think that is something that it limits a lot, you know. Like, oh, if they're from here, we have to be careful of the statement. Well, that's part of the art, you know. I think we should understand that in the environment that it is, and it should be accepted in the environment it is. I think it's based on the actual intentions, you know. If there's an art that is want to create a specific feedback or impact, it should be placed in certain areas, you know, targeting certain audience, you know. But I think one of the duties of an institution should be allowing those statements to have a voice, to have an area, to be able to have an open discussion regarding that specific, you know. And the problem is that it goes a little bit further than that. It's not only, if it's too political or it's too graphic. And I agree, there's certain things that defeats the purpose, but if it's too political, it's too graphic, or it's too regional, or it represents too much of this, or that's when we start putting limitations of it, you know. And I think part of the artist's duty is raise a question, you know. We're not here to answer anything, we're here to raise the questions, to instigate, and to create that thought process, to create that discussion. And that's what I love about this group of artists, is that every time we put a show together, one way or another one, it creates that discussion, or individual or between the pieces, you know. And I love when people come in and they stand in front of any of the paintings, or at the end of the show, and they look surprised or confused, or they have a lot of questions, or what you meant with this, and not necessarily have to answer, but I think the job is done when we can create that reaction, you know.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the duties of this group is to be able to put pieces together or shows together that it creates that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense without the limitations of, because if one of them, any of these artists by themselves try to put a show together, they will encounter those blockages,
Mm-hmm.
and which will make it really difficult for them to create a statement. We as a group can provide that venue. It makes sense.
I think something you kept bringing up that I think really connects with what Yasir is saying right now. You kept saying it's really my first time I've been exposed to Puerto Rican art, and you're not taught that. And I think unfortunately, my experience, I'm not going to say this is everyone's experience, but my experience as a museum professional, even back when I was working in Puerto Rico, I would hear a lot about European art, and and yeah, there's massive work about centralizing Puerto Rican art, but it's always, not always, but most of the times, it's the Euro-central perspective where, like we're going to talk about a master of Puerto Rican art, which is Francisco Oller. We talk about Oller and we talk about his work and what a fantastic artist he was, and the amount of arts that he produced and what it meant to the island. But I was speaking to the fact that you were saying you have never been exposed to Puerto Rican art. And I think that even back in the island, my experience as a museum professional, I was trained, well, first of all, the collection I was working with back in Puerto Rico was largely European. So it was, the European lens when I was looking at art and helping the audience interpret European art. So that was my training, that was my background. But it also translated into Puerto Rican artists. So we were talking about, like I was mentioning, Oller, he's one of the greatest masters that we have in the history of Puerto Rican art. But every time I would have a conversation with either a curator or an educator or a colleague, we would talk about Oller from his experience in France. So we were talking about who he trained alongside. So he trained with Manet, or he went to this European workshop or whatnot. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of what happens in the island and why a lot of Puerto Rican artists are not known or not respected for what they do, it's because there is an European lens. And so we start comparing the work of Puerto Rican artists to what the big names of France and Italy or whatnot have done. And I think this collective in particular, and which was one of the things that drew me into participating with the collective, was that identity it's their root. It's what they do and who they are. So it really decentralizes European art, and it reclaims the labeling, because now it's not an offense to be, oh, this is Puerto Rican art. And yes, it's problematic to label something because of where it comes from, because that can somehow create a limited perspective when you're looking at the art. But it also, by reclaiming it and saying, yeah, this is truly Puerto Rican art, it speaks to our identity as a nation. And what artists do, it's bring up the richness from the history of the island and all aspects of it, historically, just like what happens, from the minute we had inhabitants on the island, but all the way with the political climate and the workshops that first started formal artistic education in Puerto Rico. So I'm just like excited that this show is not about centralizing European art or comparing Puerto Rican art to European art, rather saying this is our identity as a group of artists and this is what we do. You're a wholesome person that have a steady background, and whether we were born, raised, and educated on the island or we were not, like in the case of Jose Feliciano, he was trained as an artist and he worked as an artist in the States. It doesn't matter. There's something connecting all of us. And yes, we are Puerto Rican artists that produce all this diverse artwork.
Those are all of the questions that I had for you guys. Do you have any questions for me about anything?
I guess my question for you is and I'm sorry if I missed part of this conversation, but I wanted to ask you when we narrowed down the list of, so when we gave you a checklist, a selection, when you were looking at it, was there a factor of, I guess, were you ever uncomfortable with the list in that, because you've never been exposed to Puerto Rican art, did that make you feel like, how do you feel about encountering something, putting together a show of art that you have never previously experienced?
Honestly, unfortunately, one of the first things I did was started looking at things and saying, oh yeah, that does kind of look like this genre that I learned about in art history, or this was probably influenced by this. But my biggest thing was I wanted to start researching because I wasn't familiar with it. I immediately went to the internet. I called Angel and said, do you have bios on these artists? He did send me bios, and I had some of the old catalogs from previous Keepers of Heritage exhibitions that I read. But I wanted to learn more about the artists themselves and their process and what inspired them so that I could curate a comprehensive show. Because the last thing I wanted to do, especially Kathie, after speaking to you a couple times, was just hang everything on the walls aesthetically and not really know anything about the people who created it. So that was definitely, I looked through the checklist and was unfamiliar, but immediately I thought I have to learn more about these people so that I can do them justice. And also because, unfortunately, like you said, a lot of them are not known in the States. I didn't ever want anyone to come in and ask a question about a painting and me stand there with my jaw on the floor going, I have no idea who this artist is. I wanted to make sure that I had a background on everyone, so that I could kind of explain their process, or if, some of them, like I learned, we met Harac Rubio. He and his son brought his sculpture and Pablo's in, and just, I had never heard of him. And I think I spoke to him for almost 2 hours just about his work. And he has a studio in Germany. And I mean, he's just fascinating. And he's definitely an artist who should get more recognition than he does. I mean, all of you should. But yeah, that was really where I started. I'm one of those people where if I don't know much about something, I have to research it because I don't like not knowing, especially when it comes to art and art history. But it was also, I think Angel was definitely he's been my biggest resource, because unfortunately, a lot of these artists are not on the internet. They don't have websites. There's nothing written about them besides what you guys have provided.
There's a whole bunch of reasons why that's true, right? Why unfortunately they're not known outside of the island, and they're not known in the island because of, there's a whole political situation with colonialism and just that stolen identity, or not being able to manifest the identity that has happened throughout history. Like there was a point in time where having a Puerto Rican flag was a crime. So just not expressing or not having a Puerto Rican flag, but displaying a Puerto Rican flag was a crime. So like there's a lot of historical reasons why a lot of the talent in the island is not known, whether it's art or science or whatever, whatever it's not at a point in time was a crime, or at a point in time meant that Puerto Ricans got to have their own identity, that was prohibited, and that kind of translated into what happens now. And it still happens, it's still heavily, there's still a lot of political reasons why Puerto Rican voices are not heard. So I think I'm grateful for anybody who wants to research and look into things and go beyond basically just comparing artworks or documents or whatever to what they know. So like create a baseline based on something else. No, but let's start with this particular piece that we have in front of us. Who are these people? Who is this artist, and how do they do things?
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions or any other thoughts about the exhibit?
At least not from me. I mean,
Okay. No, that's
ask you
okay.
already. What was your impression of it? Yeah, I think you answered that. I just hope that this is we'll actually be able to create a line of thought, a curiosity about it, and being able to open doors for some of these artists, you know, in different institutions, like yourself. I think that's one of the main goals, and hopefully we can accomplish that. And I hope I did justice to each one of these artists, you know, and like you said, hopefully next year we can bring him back to Puerto Rico, and we definitely try to put a couple more projects together, see what that takes us.
And I know, like I said, some of the pieces from deceased artists, even the fact that their families are putting things in these exhibitions and I think that's something that has also been kind of exciting, that, like you said, it spans 3 generations, and it's not just living artists who have been creating for 5 years. I mean, these pieces span decades, and it really does give people a sense of, this isn't a new movement. This is something that has been going on for years, and you're finally starting to get the recognition that you deserve for all of your hard work.
Well, I mean, like you said, it's not a new movement. It's actually a project that in different generations, that there's always a group of artists that put a group or a club or different expos all together, but it's normally in one generation with a specific target or a specific movement. The beauty of this one that is the interconnection between those 3 generations, you know, and in my personal experience is being able to work with people that are contemporary to my work, but at the same time being able to work with people that have influenced our work, our generation, and they're like we said, like big names. Some of them we know them in a personal level, you know. Some of the other ones we don't. And me being able to do a screening of their work, my personal experience, it's been huge, you know. It's a huge honor for me to be able to take these artists and they allow me to screen their work and to choose their work and put the show together, you know. It's been an amazing experience, definitely.
It is a great honor. It is definitely a great honor to be able to work with this collection and this collective of artists. Just knowing that it's really a huge responsibility, because when you're working with the collection, it's about telling the stories right. Because if you do tell the stories right and you convey the message that there's a powerful group of Puerto Rican artists creating wonderful works of art, you get visitor buy-in, in a sense, and that people will come in and will listen to your stories and will start caring. And I think we are at a perfect time socially, where people are listening to diverse voices and they're starting to care more about our opinions that we've been sharing forever and ages, but no one cared, no one stopped to listen. And I think now people are listening, and now people are interested in stepping down and saying, oh wait, it's not just my worldview, there's a whole lot out there that I don't know about. They're willing to have that humbleness of listening. And I think if we miss it, then we really missed it. But if we don't, if we get it right, then that would definitely open that door for more legitimate spaces and more ability to showcase what the collective is doing.
And it has been a huge honor for us to have the exhibition. I know it's definitely been a lot of fun.